Hello, and thank you for joining us today as we celebrate Earth Day and the youth who are fighting to protect people and the environment with their creative approaches to policy, technology, research, activism, and entrepreneurship. The world is home to 1.8 billion young people between the ages of 10 to 24, the largest generation of youth in history. Youth ages 15 to 24 account for 15.5% of the global population. At the same time, we face unprecedented challenges related to climate change. Last year was the joint hottest global record and by far the warmest record year on record in Europe, making the years from 2015 onward the warmest 6 ever. The need to include youth voices in climate has become even more pressing. These young people, whose futures are threatened by the accelerating impacts of global climate change, are increasingly demanding action toward a more just, equitable, and climate resilient society. Indeed, youth strikes from around the world have captured media and political attention. Fridays for the Future have millions of children and youth activists around the world marching, striking, and protesting for climate action. Millions more have joined the Global Youth Climate Strike in September 2019. These events draw attention to the climate crisis and have made youth a powerful and compelling force in the international climate conversation. However, because of this, youth activists and leaders have also become public targets for those looking to drive polarization. As scientist Michael E. Mann points out in his new book, The New Climate War, in an effort to undermine the message of youth leaders, a hoax photo was promoted on Facebook claiming to show trash strewn around a climate strike in Sydney, Australia. The caption read, "Look at the mess led by today's young climate protesters in the beautiful Hyde Park. So much plastic, so sad." The post was shared 19,000 times in 12 hours and thousands more times by copycats across social media platforms. However, the image wasn't from the climate strike. In fact, it wasn't even from Australia. It was taken in April 2019 at London's Hyde Park following a festival. Yet, young advocates, lawyers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, scientists, artists, and more persist and show great courage in speaking truth to power and steadfastly demanding policymakers to support urgently needed systemic changes. Our aim today is to provide an opportunity for young people, including our panelists and our audience, involved in climate action at local, national, and global levels to promote collaboration, generate new policy ideas, and drive accountability from political and business leaders. So our question now is, what is the role of youth voices in spurring climate action and in driving the implementation of commitments? As a backdrop to our discussion, today and tomorrow is the US-hosted Virtual Leader Summit on Climate. This summit is a crucial moment in the run-up to the upcoming Conference of the Parties, or COP26, of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, scheduled to take place in Scotland the first 2 weeks of November. A key goal of both the summit and COP26 is to raise climate ambitions for countries' nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, to keep a limit of warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. I'm Rebecca Peters, the Leland Foundation Association of Marshall Scholars Academy Fellow with the Energy, Environment, and Resources Group at Chatham House. Here with us today to discuss youth leadership and climate action are our fantastic panelists who bring diverse perspectives from around the world to bear on this conversation. I'm thrilled and honored to introduce them with a brief summary of their much longer and more humbling credentials. We have Sahara Shachi, who's the head of solutions mapping with the Accelerator Lab of the United Nations Development Program in Bangladesh, where she manages research on the country's development challenges. She was the first Bangladeshi to win the Asian Young Environmental Journalist of the Year award. Her stories and work center questions of food security, climate-induced migration, and women living in vulnerable coastal areas. She's also currently an MSc candidate at the University of Oxford in environmental change and management. Sonica Manhandar is a computer engineer and social entrepreneur from Nepal. She's the co-founder and chief technology officer of Alloy Technologies, which aims to make impact funding for micro-entrepreneurs available and accountable with digital tokens, with a focus on the electric minibus sector in Kathmandu. In 2019, she was named a UN Young Champion of the Earth and a National Geographic Emerging Explorer in 2020. She was also the winner of the Sustainable Development Goal 9 Infrastructure, Industry, and Innovation category award in the LEAD 2030 Challenge by One Young World. Vladislav Keim is a member of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisor on Climate Change. In this capacity, he advises the Secretary General on the implementation of the climate change strategy and making sure that youth voices are present at the highest levels of decision-making. He's been involved in youth sustainability and work locally at home in Moldova, as well as in Russia. In 2019, Vladislav helped co-organize the first ever UN Youth Climate Summit that took place in New York. He's currently a master's student in economics at Lund University in Sweden, and earlier this year was among the youngest speakers at the Malta Sustainability Forum. He's a member of Chatham House's Common Futures platform. Akufuna Moyunda is the co-chair of Resilient 40, a youth network committed to building climate resilience in Africa and finding solutions to complex problems. In this role, he engages the youth of Zambia through an organization called Young Volunteers for the Environment, inspiring countless young people to take action on climate and environment. He's also the regional coordinator for Southern and Central Africa for the Climate Reality Project, a role he took up after undertaking a role as the African Climate Reality Leader. He's also a member of the Common Futures platform with Chatham House. And last, Charlene Wren is the executive director of My H2O Water Information Network, one of the first crowdsource-based water quality mapping NGOs in China. In this role, she and her team connect data-driven solutions to over tens of thousands of rural villagers across the country. Her work on My H2O has been supported by the Echoing Green Fellowship, the Global Social Venture Competition, and National Geographic. Charlene is also a Forbes 2019 30 Under 30 winner for social entrepreneurship and one of BBC's 100 Women. Thank you all so much for joining Chatham House for this timely discussion. Now that we're all introduced, I will overview the flow of this 1.5-hour event. For the first half of our session, I will pose opening questions to our panelists, and then the second half shift to moderate audience questions. Panelists will end by offering their brief closing remarks, and I will conclude our event promptly on time at 2 p.m. London. I encourage our audience to post your questions directly in the chat as we go along. Please do include your name and affiliation and any particular panelist who you would like to direct your question to. If it's more of a general question, I will direct it accordingly or allow panelists to decide. May I please remind everyone that this event is recorded and will be shared via the Chatham House website in about 2 days. Our discussion is part of Chatham House's monthly Environment and Society discussion series, in which the Energy, Environment and Resources program brings together leading academics, practitioners, and policymakers to discuss key issues in environmental policy. So let's kick off with our opening question directed to all of our panelists. Perhaps we'll start with Charlene. I'd love to ask, what brought you to your work? What were the formative influences that drove you to pursue climate and environmental work? I'm going to address this to each panelist, and we'll keep it conversational, just maybe a few minutes to offer some reflections. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Charlene, and I'm the founder of My H2O. And I think my journey on the environmental path also started when I was influenced by others who are in this particular sector. For me, for example, I think it was really one of the experience of joining an environmental club in my high school. The club, I think it's pretty well renowned globally. It's called Roots and Shoots. So it is one chapter that was started in my high school because I think a few of my previous alumni from the high school, like when they were still in high school, they like saved some birds and they wanted to figure out what to do with it. And so they decided they wanted to start a club around it. So the club was sort of passed on. And I accidentally joined the club because I think they needed people to help with sorting trash or something. And they asked me to take part. So I helped them out during my first year in high school. And then after that, I think I did such a good job in sorting the trash, and they invited me to become the club leader for that high school club. And at that time, I really didn't know what environmentalism was, but I just thought it was an interesting opportunity. I'd love to join and learn more about this like global action that so many people are participating in, but I didn't really know much about. So I took the responsibility, and it was kind of by chance that the next year, Jane Goodall was actually visiting Beijing, and she held her event at my high school. So I was the one who hosted her because I was the representative from the club in high school. So I got the chance to meet her in person. And throughout that entire year, I really got to learn more about what it means to care for the environment, what it means to care for something beyond ourselves. Because I don't think we really got the time to learn much about that in high school, because it was high school was a period where we really focus on the college entrance exam, getting the scores and going to the good schools, because there's so much competition. And at that time, China was also still like rapidly developing. So everyone was like focusing on the economic targets, right? So it wasn't really something that was the priority at that time. Now it's much more focused, but at that moment, it definitely wasn't. So it was kind of a new perspective to understand and to see the world. So after that year, I felt like, yeah, like that seems like something that would be an interesting path to take. And so afterwards, I decided to focus on environmental engineering and nonprofits down the road. I kind of went on to study in that field, but it wasn't really until grad school where I started to think about, oh, what kind of initiative do I want to bring myself? Because at that time I had enough knowledge. I learned so much about like what's happening in China, what's happening in India. My research at that time was focusing on India's environmental issues. And I decided, oh, like is there something more that I could do? So first I joined a club in China, like an organization called China Youth Climate Action Network. So I was part of their international coordination team. And then we decided we want to do some initiatives together. And I was also focusing on like water issues in general at that time. So I thought, oh, maybe we can all look into water issues. So we kind of surveyed the market and realized that there was a lack of information on rural drinking water quality at that time. There wasn't enough people paying attention to this particular sector of the population. And since we have all these young people who are always excited to take action, especially for their summer and winter breaks, they're always willing to go somewhere to do something. So we thought, oh, maybe they can be the messenger to let people know more about what rural communities are needing, what their environments are needing, what type of water they need, and their desires for clean water. So it was really in that moment that we said, okay, maybe we can send these teams into the rural communities and help make voices. So that was kind of the start of the initiative. It was really just an initiative at the time. So we sent all these young people there to take data, to make stories, to tell all these things that are happening in the rural communities. And after a while of doing that, we kind of got the initiative rolling, and we raised more funding to support these initiatives. And then from just taking data, we decided, oh, we also want to help solve the problems. We also want to build a map where these data are tracked. We want to make sure that every single place where it needs a solution, we can help them more effectively to connect them to funders and solution providers. So we start to build this digital platform. We start to build a community of young people taking actions. And we also got more funders and people to raise awareness. And that at that time, I decided to kind of go back to my hometown. Like I was in the US at the time, so I decided to go back to China and do this as a full-time social entrepreneur. Before that, I never really thought of myself at that, but at that time, it just seemed like a natural thing to do. So kind of pushed onto this path. So I was, I guess, raised by organizations that were supporting young people. And now we are again starting another organization to support more young people taking action to serve environmental issues, especially environmental causes for the underprivileged communities in China. Yeah, so that's kind of my path. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlene. What an incredible journey. And speaking of social entrepreneurship, I'd love to hear from Sonica next, who's also had a kind of a winding pathway to her own role. Over to you, Sonica.
Thank you, Rebecca. First of all, happy Earth Day to everyone. It's pretty sad that today is the only day we celebrate Earth Day, given that we should really celebrate Earth Day every day. So to answer your question, my journey really goes back to when I was 5 years old. I shared this story last time as well, but I'd love to share that again. So I've seen, in my family, we have a public transportation business. My father started his business when I was 5 years old. So from when I was 5 years old, I've seen how he have grown his business. And then today, you know, I'm a computer engineer and I'm able to speak like this in the international platform. And which is why, I mean, as a kid, I've always seen, you know, what happens in public transportation business as an owner of a business, right? And then my whole life, I've been a public transportation user, and I've seen, you know, different pain points of this public transportation. And when I started growing up, I saw that transportation is also one of the main causes of carbon emissions or vehicular emissions and also air pollution. And when I was, not when I was, but there is a beautiful industry here in Nepal in public transportation. It's an electric vehicle sector that's mainly driven and operated by women. And coincidentally, that industry also started when I was 5 years old. But today I'm 32 years old, right? But the industry that started back in 1995 really just stayed there. Didn't grow from 700 to 7,000, but still in the same state or even less, right? So coming from a country with such immense hydropower potential, it is said that 43,000 megawatts is the potential of Nepal's hydropower. And coming from that country and seeing the electric vehicle industry that's very, very well suited for our country is not really growing, that really didn't fit in my mind. So I started researching what was the issue. Giving all that you could in this industry, these women who have been driving it for 30 years are not really being able to grow this industry that probably would boom our economy. I mean, we imported fuel worth $1.8 billion 2018. So just imagine, you know, what it can do in the economic level. So just kind of intersection between women business, economy of the whole country, and also air pollution and climate change, right? Global issue. I think this electric transportation sector is really, really well suited to really solve with one single bullet. It can really hit a lot of targets. That's something that's in my head. And I couldn't really think why this industry was not working. So I started talking with these women. So I usually just, because I'm a public transportation user, I just go there, sit in front of in front seat and talk with them and talk about what is their problem. And I've met so many interesting women. I mean, the women who started back in 1995, she was the first one to get the license of this 3-wheeler electric minibus, and still she's driving it. And she was telling me that her children are well off. They are in the US doing their studies, and they asked her to not drive these electric minibus. But for her, it was very dear. And she was telling me that now she can't really sell the tempos. The electric minibus is called tempos in Nepal. So the minibus, she cannot really sell it, and she cannot really put it in the garage because it will rust. It's all metal, and she will also have to pay rent in the garage. And third is it's a vicious cycle for her to keep it running, because the battery they used to use was very, very old technology. And to upgrade that, the formal financing sector are really not trusting them, because, you know, the movable asset is not considered as collateral and they don't have any credit history and stuff like that. So we saw that this traditional financial system was really not working for women, which is why the sector was really dying, and it was taking down the whole economy of the country per se. So we decided to start this company. We are a fintech platform, so we have a mixture of finance and technology to see how we can really build the trust between these women micro entrepreneurs that are contributing by leading these green businesses, the electric transportation sector, right? They're really leading this climate-friendly option, but they are not really trusted for amounts such as $10,000 or $11,000, right? It's not much, but then it probably would have changed the electric vehicle scenario of Nepal and also the business scenario of these women. So we decided, okay, so if you are not willing to give cash as a loan, we'll digitize the whole loan process. We say, we give you the software, that will let you invest in these green businesses led by women in digital tokens, so that you know where the money is really right now, which means you can really trust these women that they are actually using this fund to fund their green businesses and not really buying TV or having alcohol or whatever else, right? So we established this solution, and we just recently, actually yesterday, we signed an agreement with a commercial bank to give out affordable finance for these Safa Tempo, the electric minibus owners, to get financing at very, very low 3% to 5%, which usually probably would have 22% in the usual scenario. So very happy to share that now because it was announced yesterday. So we are doing that currently. And I think the whole journey of seeing my family run a transportation business and seeing this beautiful industry in Nepal, but they're not growing, I think that's something that's really close to my heart from the family's perspective, and also for the overall growth of the country or prosperity of the country. I see there should be a bigger vision for economic growth of the country, and that leading to really solving the global challenges such as climate change, right? So that's sort of my journey that I'd like to share.
Thank you so much, Sonica. So many amazing themes emerging already just from hearing from you and Charlene around entrepreneurship and technology. And I'd love to hear from Vlad, who's been working, I think, quite a bit on the economics and policy side of things. Vladislav?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And thanks to Chatham House for this opportunity to spotlight the activity of both me and my colleagues throughout this webinar. And of course, happy Earth Day, everyone, though I don't think the Earth is particularly feeling happy right now, but that's a question I think we will discuss further down the line. In terms of what has motivated me in my journey, I think that there was no one specific trigger, but multiple incremental events that have facilitated it. If I were to look back and to trace the very beginning of it, I would trace it probably to the year 2011, where I was finishing my middle school, and my chemistry teacher helped me with providing information on a competition that was related to the economy of the Dniester, which in the Republic of Moldova is one of the two key river basins, and is also supplying 80% of our potable water. And I participated in this competition and got the first prize for short story narratives, and then visited it myself multiple times in multiple places, both in the territory that is controlled by constitutional authorities of the Republic of Moldova and in the breakaway part. And it's just the dire picture of when you see how the situation in terms of biodiversity and in general the livelihood around it is changing, and you can feel it. You can feel sort of the hopelessness of the slippery slope down the which the situation with the ecosystem is going has been really concerning. And some of the pictures that I have seen while being there, they are still a little bit haunting me to this day. And when I, after that, started already moving more towards the involvement into sustainability side of things, youth advocacy for sustainability, I have moved to Russia, where I did my bachelor studies. And at that time, we're talking about 2014, 2015, there was not a lot of space, neither in public discourse, nor among the fellow youth when it came to the sustainability agenda of the day back then. At that time, there was SDGs were still only being elaborated. There was still MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. So, and I remember that in my university, particularly in my dorm room, together with two colleagues of mine, as part of our university economic club, we have co-founded a student community called SDG International Youth Forum. Well, at that time it was called MDG International Youth Forum, which had as the goal of sharing the information and building the capacity of young people in both university cycle studies, but also in the high school, to spread more information to their communities about the importance of the global sustainability agenda in its various iterations, and pushing more to emphasize the local applicability of those issues. And the youth community, which was the first of its kind at the time, has grown from there into a network that is encompassing, depending on year-on-year basis, 6 to 12 hubs all over Russia, and this has involved more than 1,000 students and activists every yearly edition, and it's also involving the expat students as well, who were studying back then in Russian universities and high schools and orientation activities. And back when in 2017, when my mandate as Secretary General of the Youth Forum has expired, we have seen that the new generation of leadership that has taken it further up has grown such recognition in terms of the human capital that they produce, in terms of the colleagues that have come out of the forum, that so many of them have assumed later pretty important positions when it comes to youth sustainability agenda, be it national SDG youth ambassadors or otherwise. And back then, already in 2019, I was invited to help co-organize particularly the UN Youth Climate Summit, which was a very unique event in its own right, because by that time, the issue of democratizing youth climate space has been very burning, as both the climate strikes and the conversations inside the UN system have shown. And as an experiment, me and 25 colleagues of mine were helping the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth to coordinate the programming of the summit and the selection of 100 green youth tickets, young participants who had the most impressive stories, and thus were invited to New York to showcase them, to collaborate to initiate great collaborations with their colleagues and so on. And some collaborations that have come out of it are pretty important actually for youth climate policy making all the way until now. For example, the pledge for creating and establishing national youth climate councils that was launched there has already borne fruit. There are some chapters established both in Europe but also in other continents. The most successful examples being Denmark and Poland. And here I am from 2020, being the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisor on climate change. And what motivates me here, and what I think also has been an extremely important point for Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General to go with my candidacy, is the opportunity to showcase the Eastern European young climate case for climate action, because our regional perspective is very often overlooked, even though we are suffering no less in terms of the consequences of climate action. And at the same time, we are a pretty important laboratory region when it comes to showing what a just transition looks like.
Thank you so much, Vladislav. What an incredible pathway to this very high-level policy work that you're looking at now, beginning in Moldova to Russia to Sweden, and now at this incredible scale. It's really, really amazing to hear from each of you. I'd love with that to turn it over to Sahara, if you're able to join us.
Great. Thank you so much for having me in this event. It's fantastic to hear from all the fellow panelists as well. So to very quickly try to run you through my journey so far, I grew up in one of the most densely populated, cramped cities in the planet, which Rebecca is very well aware of, Dhaka in Bangladesh. And it was a very tiny city apartment, but like most kids in my generation, we always heard stories from my families of how our great grandparents had acres of land and how they'd run around in the fields, and it was just land was never an issue, right? But we can really relate to that because we were living in this like cramped, tiny city apartments, and that was just life for us. But that happened because our parents chose to relocate to these cities from the villages they lived and their families lived in. But we were some of the lucky ones. The millions of people who relocate in Bangladesh are actually forced to do so because they're climate migrants and they are losing their lands, they're losing their livelihoods to these exacerbating floods and cyclones and storms and sea level rise, which are essentially forcing them to leave lives as they knew it and relocate to the cities. And they end up in far worse accommodations than most of us, living in very dilapidated slums. So this was a very, I think, a core theme of my life growing up and seeing these buildings next to slums, and that juxtaposition always hit me. And I wondered if there was a way that this inequality that existed was being exacerbated by climate impacts. So I, after graduating, thought, what was one thing I could do about it? And obviously with a liberal arts degree, the one thing you do learn to do is how to write well. So I was like, sure, I'll try to use my journalism skills that I developed as working for my college newspaper to sort of try to shed more light on the, the perils of these people living in different corners of my country. So I started traveling from the very remote sort of hill tracts region where indigenous minorities live, whose cropping patterns, traditional cropping patterns were being affected by changing weather patterns, to the coastal areas where millions of women, who are already more vulnerable to climate change to begin with, were really facing the brunt of climatic impacts. And while writing about these stories, I noticed that really there was the power of the written word was remarkable, and it really helped people not only learn about these issues and care more, but also mobilize funds. Like some of the articles led to people donating to these communities who were, for instance, facing the worst, famine in the recent history because of not being able to grow crops with changing rainfall patterns. But, while that was all great and the writing was taking me to places like the UN General Assembly, the World Economic Forum's annual conference in Davos and whatnot, even I went to 3 different climate conferences, I realized just raising awareness was not enough. And me doing it was not enough. I needed to be able to bring these experiences back and empower more people to do so. So I started training more young people to be better writers in my free time, because obviously I have a full-time job as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in my free time, essentially, I try to train young people, especially those who were not traditionally represented in the climate discourse, because we see that this entire talk about climate change is often dominated by the intellectual elite, but the ones who are on the forefront of these impacts are often not represented. So I trained youth from these marginalized communities to write in the local language Bengali and in their local newspapers and also in the mainstream media. And I think one of my happiest memories was when these girls who go to this religious institution madrasa, who never even read newspapers, actually published an article they wrote on a national newspaper. So I think that was kind of the journey for a while for me. But after a few years in journalism, I realized, of course, this was great, but how could I really engage more youth in a more structured manner to care about climate change and environmental issues? So with my youth organization, Global Shapers Community, which has chapters all over the world, and at that point, I was leading the chapter in Bangladesh, we launched a project named Trillionaire, which essentially, involved bringing young people into the climate discourse and action by engaging them hands-on in tree plantation and city greening initiatives around Dhaka, and from a very young age. So we would essentially show up to their schools with trees, and we'd make all these animations and show them to the kids and try to really engage them in appreciating nature more. And when that would end with a tree plantation drive with the kids, and essentially they would become the guardian of the tree they plant. So in that way, the aim was to instill this sense of love and guardianship of nature in them from an early age, so that hopefully when they go into positions of power, they would be more responsible and environmentally conscious leaders. So with all that, I realized for keeping initiatives like these alive, funding was essential, right? And that's where the work with UNDP comes in, which is my full-time job. We try to mobilize more finance for climate initiatives, for initiatives led not just by youth, by adults as well, and by the government and by grassroots organizations, and try to get more financing from not just the traditional sources like the multinational donor government organizations, but also from the private sector, because I feel like that is really where the future is. And if we can't engage the private sector in a meaningful way in the climate discourse and action, this is going to be an uphill battle. So I'm really happy that we're having these discussions on Earth Day, because I think this is really important that these stories are shared. And I'm hopeful that all the stories the panelists have shared would motivate more young people in climate action. So yeah, thank you for giving us this floor.
Thank you, Sahara. It's great to have you with us and contributing to this conversation with so many diverse backgrounds and perspectives and experiences. With that, I would love to turn over to Akufuna to speak about your kind of formative influences and what kind of drove you into working on climate work and environmental education. Over to you, Akufuna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much to Chatham House for organizing this incredible event, bringing young people all over the world together to discuss, youth voices on climate action. This is what we need to see more happening even in the near future. because we live in a globalized village, common challenges experienced differently. Talking about my own life journey in the space, it took me 12 years to first learn or hear about climate change. In my year 12 was the first time when actually I came across the word, the phrase global warming. And my lifestyle at high school, I was very much active in extracurricular activities. So most of the time I would engage myself in public school debates. I would engage myself in the junior engineers and technicians scientists club. And also, we had the anti-AIDS club as well. So I used to help young people get engaged in all those clubs. And my activism, inspired my interest to work with and for young people throughout my life. And I drove my inspiration from my father, who has been the community-led leader, who has worked so hard to bring development, positive development to our communities, our poor communities, to address challenges of hunger and poverty, as well as education, access to education. And when I was at high school in my year 12, my club patron for the JETS Club, the Junior Engineers and Scientists Technicians Club, introduced a competition which was organized by the Zambia Meteorological Department in the province, the western part of Zambia. So it was a provincial competition on global warming. No one was interested in this competition, apparently in our grade. And I got so interested because I got used to get engaged in extracurricular activities at school, not because I knew anything about global warming or climate change. So when I started working on the essay competition, I began to research. I engaged my geography teacher, and this is when I started having some little light about global warming, ozone layer, climate change, global warming, ozone layer, climate change. And as I put together my essay, I think I realized that there's a huge gap because there are very few, students that were engaged, and also why wasn't this competition attract a lot of young people to participate? So, lucky enough, a week later, the same patron came back and announced that actually this competition has got some prize attached to it. That was about 250 kwacha, Zambian kwacha for the first prize, second prize 200 kwacha, and the third prize 50 kwacha. So at this point, I saw a lot of fellow students getting interested in participating because they saw an initiative about it. So I was like, wow. So people get interested because of an incentive, not because of what this is all about. But what was interesting about it is I won the first prize for the provincial competition on the essay competition on global warming. And I think that became a challenge to me, especially that it took me 12 years to first hear about climate change. That's not acceptable in our present day generation. So when I went to university, the University of Zambia, I was studying ecology. So I had an opportunity to be elected as the president for the Biological Sciences Association, as well as the Secretary General for the Youth of the United Nations at the university. So I gave myself, a target, and this was to inspire the young people that I work with into the space for climate change and environmental sustainability advocacy. But I didn't know how to do that because I also had limited information. As you know, in Zambia and in Africa in general, it's very difficult for a young person like myself to access resources to support my intended passion to promote climate justice or action overall. So all my work entirely has been on voluntary basis. And if you want to motivate young people from the voluntary perspective, it is almost a hard nut to crack. It's almost difficult. Yeah. So luckily enough, I employed a new strategy of engaging other stakeholders. This is why I wanted to promote networking by engaging, external organizations and institutions that are working on climate change and environmental issues. I first became part of the committee on the World Environment Day commemoration with the government of Zambia under the Ministry of Environment. So they used to invite me every time we have the commemoration for the World Environment Day. So I would carry along with myself fellow students from the two associations to go and participate with me and also discuss the question on environment with the government and other stakeholders. So by so doing, it became so interesting, not only to myself, but my fellow students. And I think my hunger to do more increased. And lucky enough, in 2011, we had the organization called Green EnviroWatch, which organized the first ever regional climate change conference which was held in Zambia under the SADC region. And we all participated in that, and I invited all my fellow students to go with me. I remember I didn't have transport money, but I had to walk to attend this conference because I really wanted to see something happening out of that. And like enough, there's a man called Sena Aluka, the executive director for the Young Volunteers Environment in Africa, which is headquartered in Togo. He was also in attendance, and my contribution in the summit, attracted his attention. So he invited me and my fellow young people to challenge us to establish the Young Volunteers for Environment Zambia, chapter. So from that conference, we established the Young Volunteers for Environment chapter with zero resources at all. We had about 50 young people that were interested in formulating this organization in Zambia. And 3 months down the line, we had only 12 left. And 1 year down the line, so we are only 3 of us with my fellow colleagues. And 2 years down the line, I was the only one left in the organization. It was quite crazy, no resources, no nothing, no incentives to motivate young people. It's quite stressful as well, especially when I began to see the value of why we need to promote youth engagement on the subject of climate change in Zambia. I never gave up. I continued to talk to a few young people that were interested. Then I went ahead to the University of Zambia and identified one of the Professor Jacob Malungo, who was interested in working with young people. And I remember attending one of these events at the University of Zambia where we are talking about the MDGs. And he spoke so well there, and he spoke so well about his commitment to working with young people. So I challenged him on that. He got interested and he joined us to establish the Young Volunteers for Environment. So in 2012, we received funding. Not really direct funding and not locally mobilized funds, but also from Togo, our headquarters for Young Volunteers for Environment, to just support us to promote climate education on deforestation in one of the deforested areas in Zambia. So we started working with communities once in a while, and the challenge came. And one of the community leaders, the headman, asked me was, yes, you have taught us. Yes, we know that deforestation is happening, and yeah, we need to stop cutting down trees. But what are we going to do? Because as far as we are concerned, this is our source of livelihood. We have no other alternatives provided. It was a big challenge to me. I started thinking about it. What can we do so that we don't just talk about these things, but also provide alternatives, provide solutions to the problem? And from that time, I was totally blank. I had no resources to bring in any initiatives. I had no opportunities to identify any stakeholder that can bring us some funds or whatever resources we need to bring solutions to the people. Lucky enough, I didn't know that some people were watching when we were doing this work. So the organization called FSD, Financial Sector Development in Zambia, identified me and they called me and encouraged me to participate in the training organized by the Climate Reality Project in South Africa. It was the first ever, African-led, leadership COP. It was organized in 2014, and they sponsored my participation. I attended the full training, and I remember the former US Vice President Algo speaking to us for over 4 hours without any stop, and I could see how much passionate he is to the cause. He really encouraged us, and he really showed us the evidence of the impact of climate change, and also the opportunities we have in the solutions provided in the renewable energy solutions and many other initiatives around the world, to see what other countries are doing, and also to see how other countries are committed and what other governments are doing to support the involvement of young people, and so on and so forth. So I got so much interested, my network started growing, and that started inspiring me, and also I was encouraged to keep on keeping on in this space. So from that, I was able also to start finding new, colleagues in the space from the African perspective. So I was a member of the African Youth Initiative on climate change, where I'm serving as a regional coordinator as well. Then I was appointed also to be the regional coordinator for the African Climate Reality Project, working with other climate reality leaders across Africa, over 600 of them, supporting them on the day-to-day leadership acts, to also encourage them to engage various communities in the conversation. What is also interesting, I began to realize the need for creating safe space platforms for youth engagement, so that we can inspire dialogue between young people, so that we can learn from each other and share ideas, and also share stories that can inspire each other. And this is how I got interested in the opportunity which Chatham House presented to us through the Common Futures Conversation Project. of which I applied myself. Actually, I didn't know what was going to be the result of that, but lucky enough, I was appointed as a country representative for Chatham House Common Futures Conversation, with the objective to create a youth platform for dialogue between European and African young people. And I told myself, this is the opportunity which we should utilize and push up the agenda to talk about the many other issues, policy issues, political issues, but most importantly, also, this is the platform we can use to bring about the conversation around climate change and youth involvement. So this has been an interesting journey, and through all this involvement from the voluntary perspective and through networking and collaboration and co-creation and coexistence between various stakeholders in the space, I was able to identify myself now as an advocate for climate and justice in Africa. And today, 1 year ago, I was voted to be the first co-chairperson for the Resilient 40 Africa, dedicated to supporting youth voices in creating impact on the African continent by creating resilient communities around and within Africa. So this is where I come from, and I'm still here, and I think there's more to do. And I'm happy that I've met new friends today on the panel who have done so much incredible stuff. But the biggest challenge that African youth voices have is such kind of platforms are not easily accessible. It's very difficult to find yourself on such kind of platform. And also access to resources is very difficult. If you want to access easy resources, go through the entertainment route. People give you money to do whatever you want to do. But if you want to talk about climate change, it's quite difficult. And currently, the climate education literacy levels are so low in the country. I don't want a Zambian in the near future to take 12 years to just hear or learn something about climate change. I want every young person going forward, the new generation to come, at least even when they are celebrating their first year as a birthday, they should at least hear something or learn something about climate change. And I told myself that I will demonstrate this as an example. So my daughter's birthday is coming on the 23rd June. I want to plant a tree for her. So that when she grows up, I'll tell her to say, on her first birthday, you planted a tree. Keep on planting the trees. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fernand. Thank you for those fantastic reflections. And it's a great segue mentioning Common Futures conversations and thinking about platforms, because I would like to bring on to speak briefly to ask their question, Selan Inan from Turkey, who's a member of the Common Futures Conversations platform. Selan, over to you for your question. If there's one or two panelists in particular who would like to speak to this question, I'd like to give panelists 1 or 2 minutes to reply so that we can get to many questions. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is generally for whoever feels like they would like to take it on. But I first want to thank you all so much for the insights you've shared and the work you do. And I really hope you never tire of hearing what an inspiration you all are. My question is, and Okufuna kind of touched on some of these, but beyond financial resources, what kind of challenges prevent or delay achieving scalability for the solutions you or other social entrepreneurs you may have met along the way have come up with, and in exporting them, obviously, as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selan. And thank you very much to the Common Futures Conversation for facilitating getting these great questions involved. We have a ton of questions coming in, so who might I turn this one on scalability over to? Charlene or Sonica? Please.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just a few things. I guess definitely everything comes down to finance, but then there are other constraints as well. And through my experience, what I have seen, when you are working in the field, sometimes it's not about scaring people about this huge challenge called climate change, right? Sometimes it's about making them understand that whatever they are doing from the local level is actually helping solve this climate change. But then sometimes they don't know it. They're just doing whatever they are doing it. But then as a climate advocate yourself, or as a technological person yourself, you go there and make sure that you ease the process for them, right? For example, we recently invested, not us, but then the banks invested in beekeeping. And she was from a very, very rural area of Nepal, and she was starting this beekeeping business of her, right? But for her, it's just a business. It's not about, saving the bees or whatever else. But what we did was we eased the process of her accessing the finance to really grow that business, right? And again, in terms of scalability, of course, first you need to make people understand that they are doing this better things for the environment. But then first thing is definitely for them to really let whatever they are doing at this point, and then graduate them from that mindset to the bigger mindset where they're saying, okay, I want to scale this business of beekeeping, and then I want to go to next level, and that's the scalability, and that's where the financial access also comes into the picture. Yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yeah. I can also tag along. I think financial is one part of it. And the other thing is also related to like, if we want more people to participate in this, like how do we reach that level of people, right? Because even with so much attention being put on environmental issues, sometimes the volunteer work that we call for or we promote is still kind of restricted to one particular circle of people. There's still a bubble, like at least in China, there's still a bubble between people who are in the NGO sector, people who are outside of the sector. And for example, during some of our like global giving sort of holidays, you see all the NGO people sharing everything, and then once you're outside of the circle, no one even knows about the holiday. No one knows what we're doing. No one knows what the volunteers are advocating for. There's kind of a wall, like a brick wall between these two sectors. And how do you really jump out of your own circle to involve as many people as possible? And once you involve them, there's also a difference between managing all these volunteers directly. Like you want something to happen on one side, you manage them directly. But there's only so many people that one organization can manage directly, unless you keep growing human resources, right? But otherwise, if you want to scale, it's really hard to use this direct management model. You have to make sure that somehow they can empower themselves and kind of get going themselves, right? You like give them the tools and then they'll get going, right? So you kind of need to make sure that they become more self-motivated, self-managed, and you just give them the tools and then they can do their thing. And it's only in that way the link becomes looser and you can actually replicate it in more places, because it's very hard if every single volunteer hub is directly managed by you. So that's kind of one of the challenges that we go to. But once you get to that scale, there's also a problem because a lot of the work we do are relatively professional. If you want to lower the bar, you want people to self-manage, you like we do data collection, right? You want all the public to participate, then you can't depend on the quality of the data, right? You can't make sure that everyone's like doing the right thing, giving out the right solutions, then things get out of control. The quality control part becomes harder. So then you have to decide between, do I want to scale or do I want to do some of these like really good cases, right? So you want to kind of figure out that balance. So that's also a really tricky part. Like, do you care more about public participation, engaging as many people as possible? Do you consider that to be scale? Or do you want to do a few really, really good cases and make best practices and use those cases to influence other people? Do you call that scale, right? These are two different directions of scaling up. And that's where you have to make the decision, like which direction you want to go into. And that's also a difference between like a quantitative scaling up, like basically I want to increase the numbers of people I involve. And then there's also an impact scaling up, because impact, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to involve more people. It just means you involve the more important people. Like you make a few really good example, and then you put them into policy briefs, and then you send them to the upper government, and then they change policy, right? Like that's a really higher level, like impact, like scale impact, but you didn't really involve more volunteers. You just basically know how to make it into the right policy brief to deliver to the right people, and then you change things systematically. So those are two different directions, and then they require different sort of expertise. And then which do you really consider scaling for your organization is the decision that every organization has to make itself. And to eventually scale the impact, yeah, like it doesn't necessarily mean the quantitative scaling. It actually means knowing who to talk to, which is the right channel to deliver the message that you want to deliver, especially within China, where the government has a lot of power, like knowing who to reach to make the change you want to see in the system. That's the critical part about scaling our impact. Yeah.
Well, with that same theme, because I realize Akufuna needs to leave us in a few minutes. Akufuna, in just a minute or two, I'd love for you to answer a question from Melissa, would you like to ask your question live about how think tanks like Chatham House can be involved?
Thanks for the fantastic presentations all round. My question is specific and quite practical. I think that many organizations are doing better at, putting on these kinds of events and inviting younger people to present their ideas. But what do you think organizations, think tanks like Chatham House can do to include and promote the ideas of younger stakeholders beyond simply speaking at events?
Thank you, Melissa. Great question. And Akufana, it'd be great to hear from you, especially considering your involvement in teachers' conversations.
Yeah, it's quite interesting and a very interesting question, of course. So beyond just participating like what we are doing now, I think we're already doing very well when it comes to the common futures conversation, where Chatham House mobilizes policymakers, from different countries, from different sectors, to come and speak with young people. We have an opportunity to hear from them, their perception, their plans in terms of policy direction and also youth engagement. But practically also, I believe Chatham House can also provide training opportunities for young people so that we can not only discuss and share ideas, but also upskill. Of course, we have a lot of young people involved, but of course, we also need to look at what kind of skills do the young people need, what kinds of knowledge development do they need, how do we engage them in research and development. Such kind of opportunities can help us be able to improve our understanding so that we can actually be able to debate, share ideas from a more informed perspective and a more, decision-oriented perspective, because we should be able to make decisions at the end of the day. But how can I make a decision? I've got limited knowledge, if I've got limited capacity. So if Chatham House can go further beyond just creating the platforms and provide, capacity building opportunities for young people, it can be in form of scholarships, can be in form of conferences and workshop or training, whatever it is. But if we can bring something to the young people which can help them be able to develop and become more resourceful even in such kind of events like this one, so that we can even be able to analyze global policies on climate change, so that we can even be able to debate with global leaders from a more informed and more equipped perspective. So I think in that perspective, I think we will get somewhere, because I believe climate education should be number one. And when you're talking about young people, a more informed generation of young people becomes a more decisive generation of young people. And then we can talk about a better future for all, because we are going to have guaranteed leaders that are fully equipped with the knowledge and skills to even develop better policies, to even be able to argue from an informed perspective. If you talk about the COP26, negotiation will be taking place there. How many young people are able to negotiate? Do they have the skills to negotiate? Just me knowing that climate change is a crisis is not enough. I need to know how to communicate that effectively. What can Chatham House do to develop the skills of young people when it comes to the communication, so that even when the COP26 comes, we'll be able to negotiate and be able to argue with the different perspective on what we stand for. So I think those are critical for me, beyond just Sundays like this to talk to each other and share, but also most importantly, like what the Common Futures Conversation is already doing, creating synergies between young people, so that at least we can have joint proposals, for example, that can be supported. We know some staff are working well in other countries in the European perspective, but maybe they may not be working well in Africa. What can we learn from each other? Bringing young people together to learn from each other is a great, achievement altogether, because there are certain challenges that Zambia is facing today that by me talking to a colleague of mine, Sonica, Kaim, Charlene, Sahara, can help me actually look at it from a different perspective and provide a solution that is tangible and that can actually achieve results for all of us. So I think that is a more practical approach to all this. It's a complex situation. It's a complex problem. We need to accept that, and this is why we need more practical approach to addressing all these issues. Of course, the eyes are all on COP26. But our eyes should be beyond COP26. Our eyes should go as far as the next generation and the generation to come. Most importantly, to creating a better planet for all. And it starts with young people today. And right now is the best time. And this platform is the best platform to start from. After this platform, after this event, what next? I think that's a more practical approach. Are we going to say, yeah, it was a wonderful event, see you next time? Or are we going to have practical, actions that we are going to pick out from this? Each participant, not only the presenters or panelists or organizers, but each participant. I always talk to my colleagues that there are certain small ideas that can be supported, encouraged, even from an individual perspective. If we take a more personal approach, what am I doing back home? Do I have my own food garden? Do I have my own, way of managing my consumption levels at household level? All those issues are very practical. So I think that can be the best way to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Akufena, for answering Mosa's very timely question about how institutions like Chatham House can better engage youth. And with that, I would also like to turn over to Ella Burdett from the United Kingdom, who's another Common Futures Conversations member, to pose her question. And please keep your answers to 1 or 2 minutes. We've got lots of amazing questions coming in. It'd be great to have a chance to answer as many of them as possible before we wind down. Ella, over to you. And please, if there's any particular speaker who you'd like to put your question to, just let us know.
Thank you so much. And I'd just like to thank all the panelists for sharing their journeys and their perspectives. They're truly fantastic to listen to. So my question is really an open question to all the panelists. And it's, how do you think science-driven research on climate can be better integrated with nature-based solutions and Indigenous knowledge that treat nature as having intrinsic and not just instrumental value?
Is there anyone in particular who would like to take this question?
I think I can start the discussion on this. So before we moving into the mainstreaming of the reports such as IPCC, for example, and other scientific findings into the framework of nature-based solutions, we need to address the issue of how this mainstreaming works for even greater analytical picture. Because, for example, when we take a look at the certain important international analytical documents, which I know many decision makers actually base their decisions upon, the AR5 scenario from IPCC for 1.5 degrees warming is not integrated there at all. For example, the most wide known case of that is the World Energy Outlook by the International Energy Agency, where we are still struggling to see a fully elaborated scenario that is compliant with 1.5 degrees scenario and also put at the forefront of the outlook, and that has pretty significant implications down the line. When it comes now going already to nature-based solutions, from the experience of the work that I had, also especially with the colleagues who are representing indigenous advocacy issues and are indigenous people themselves, I can hear them being incensed with the fact that the perception of indigenous knowledge to begin with, in many cases, is this of some sort of magic, that nobody quite would know how it came from. While they are saying it's just our experience of generations of how we were living on our lands and the practices that we have developed. So essentially, it's the utmost empirical knowledge, and there is nothing magical in that. And I think that's where science can particularly help, because with the right scientific framing and augmented by public communications effort that would emphasize that, when we are now also in that stage, we are still formulating and implementing the post-COVID recovery packages, making sure that the nature-based solutions are, as far as the climate part of those goes, are an important part of it, is pretty important to drive the prosperity of indigenous people and to bring more jobs, both short term and in the long term.
Thank you so much, Vladislav. That's a really, really great answer. I want to turn over to Ben Horton from the audience, who's asked a great question that I think would be great to hear from, perhaps from Sahara. But Ben, if there's anyone in particular who you'd like to answer it, please.
Great. This has been a really fantastic panel. Thank you so much. I don't think I want to direct this at anyone in particular, but I just wanted to maybe ask you maybe a tough question, but all of you have such a lot of experience engaging with decision makers, politicians, people that work at international aid agencies, international organizations. And I just wondered, for any sort of young activists who are in the audience who maybe haven't had those opportunities, I wondered if you had any advice on how to get the most out of those exchanges. I guess there's always a danger potentially that policymakers see sort of engaging with young people as a kind of nice thing to do, a kind of photo op in some ways. But how do you ensure that actually, as a young person, your views kind of matter, that they're conveyed and that they actually have impact with the people who can actually change policy on climate change? Thanks very much.
Yeah, I can start with the answer. Great question, Ben. And I think it's one that a lot of us who are in this space had to face and like still face to some extent. Just to give an example, for me, at least in South Asia, a great way to engage for young people is to start from the grassroots and sort of build up their connections and build legitimacy, and then try to run for a position, let's say in the parliament or within the local city council. So one of my friends who was trying to do that, going through that route, to hold up a position within the city government, it involved getting 1,000 signatures from people in the area who'd say they essentially support you. They support you as a candidate. Now, as a young person coming in with only, like maybe you've lived only 25 years and you're competing against candidates who have like had 45 years to build that rapport with local people, it's really an unequal ground. So I feel like those kind of systems are the ones that we need to challenge to begin with, in terms of, is that the best way to really, make the field equitable for young people to have to be in those positions of power? If we see only 2% of MPs around the world are under the age of 30, and that is because of systemic issues like that, which, act as a barrier to entry. And even if for a young person who's interested in running for a position, there isn't really a manual that exists for how to become an MP. We kind of learn about political science in a very academic level, but we don't really learn about the nitty-gritty of how to engage. So I feel like for that, organizations like Chatham House can also have events to really sort of guide young people in terms of how to engage more systematically. But before those things happen, I think the fundamental thing that we all can do is to start building our credibility by doing something on the ground, utilizing our networks and within our constituencies to sort of have one initiative that we can use as a bargaining chip to have that first conversation with a politician, with a local representative, and then sort of go from there. I think that has worked for a lot of people that I know, and that can definitely be a good entry point for any of you who are trying out.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to give an answer in 1 or 2 minutes? And we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions before we turn to closing statements.
From my experience for communicating with the Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, and many colleagues within the UN system and beyond, I can tell that there are 3 types of people you're most likely to encounter as youth. First type are the people who genuinely understand the value of youth engagement and are interested in furthering it. Then there is a second type, which Ben talked about a little bit in his question, is those who understand but do not want to. But what I see as underlooked category, a pretty important category to engage with, is the third one. Those are the people who just do not understand the value of youth engagement, because by the way of their working, they have never interacted with anyone from youth, and they don't really see but how I'm gonna integrate them in my work. And that's why many interactions that I had, for instance, with some colleagues from the UN system, they were initially at first a little awkward, because, as I said, people they just don't know what is that, from which side you can start taking it. And but that's also there is also a seed of optimism in that, in the sense that it allows to develop a rapport that is not a sprint but a marathon. And that would be my general advice to the youth who is engaging with decision makers, is make sure that this is not a sprint, not one-off, but a marathon of engagement where you compound the issues on your common agenda and establish a relationship that works and does not depend on this bursts of required publicity. So it works both in public and beyond closed doors as well.
Thank you, Vladislav. That's a great one. I'd really like to turn to Sunday Jeffrey, I hope I said your surname correctly, to answer, to pose your question to our panelists. if you have anyone in particular who'd like to answer it, please let us know. But I think this would be a great one for Charlene or Sonica. Sunday, would you like to read your question aloud? Okay, then perhaps I'll just read it out loud. So Sunday says that they're so inspired by your stories and is really encouraged to learn that many of you have had humble beginnings. Sunday is leading a restoration project in the northwest region of Cameroon, where there's been a lot of socio-political instability since 2017. They write that the rural population and the minority Mboro community has embraced the initiative and volunteers for tree planting programs. But many development stakeholders, including local council, think that restoration programs and climate change shouldn't be a priority. What advice can you give? I'd love to put that one perhaps first to Charlene, who I know has worked extensively in rural areas in China.
Yeah. So these are the issues that we face a lot as well when we're trying to deliver solutions to the rural communities we're trying to engage with. Some of the common responses are like, first, it's not a priority, or if you install a new solution, it meant that the original governmental solution failed, right? And that doesn't look good for the government. So it means that if you actually donate something, it means that they didn't do it well, and they feel like that's bad reputation, especially for last year where China was undergoing this, like the poverty alleviation was such a strong target, and none of the villages want any extra attention because it might cause them to get more attention from the central government, feeling like they're not doing a good job of alleviating like the overall well-being of the, like improving the well-being of the village. So that was quite challenging for us. So I can share a few of the ways that we approach this issue, but it might not necessarily apply to your village in particular, because I think every country government differs a lot. So for us, a few of the ways we've done it, like first, is to find if there are people who are more familiar with the local stakeholders. Because we, as an outsider, when we approach a village, we are still coming as an outsider. So we look for local, we call them village opinion leaders, like VOLs. So we can see if they can be like the voice maker for you, and they can participate in the negotiation because they have more of an influence locally, and see if they can pass the message on and be kind of the messenger instead of we going as an outsider talking directly to the local stakeholders. And if that doesn't work, another way we do it is sometimes we escalate the matter, right? If the village leader doesn't work, we go to like the county leader or kind of the leader above them, and to say, oh, we want to do something in this village, like, do you think this is a good idea, right? Like, because we know that at the lower level it doesn't work, so we'll kind of see if escalating it works in a certain way, because especially when you go to some of these agencies, and if they agree with your agenda, they can push it from a top down. But again, that has some risk with it, because basically you're jumping over their heads, right? So that might mean like some trouble with the relationship down the road, but that would be a way to do it if you feel like it's really necessary and you can't work it at the bottom level. And another way is, I don't know if there's a formal channel where you can pass your message through. So in China, there are some formal channels where you can give written advice or statements. And then if you write it to kind of a higher level government, if you can't meet them in person, you can write it through their formal channel, and they're required to respond within a certain amount of day. So if you put like a written suggestion in and make it really elegant, and then contact the right people, and then they're required to give you a response about why they can't do it. And in that process, there might be more negotiations happening. And then lastly, you go to the media, right? But that's kind of the last resort that you want to do, because then it becomes a really big issue. And then that could cause some negative reputation on the organization. But then there are people who's done that before. There's one, not necessarily NGO, but it's actually an art group. And then they found out of pollution in one location. The government wouldn't do anything. So they basically took many samples of dirty water from that village, and they were selling it in Beijing. And then that caused a big scene, and the government looked into that issue and it got solved. But then like that kind of art group had a really bad relationship with the government. So all the government would kind of like get away from them and like kind of put them in jail and stuff like that. So there's a lot of challenge with that, but sometimes that's the last resort if you really want to get some things done. And that's really necessary at that moment. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd love to turn a last question over to Sonica before we turn to we might have time for one more, depending how long this one takes to answer. But I would love to hear from Saleh Kamil Saleh. Saleh, if you're available and would like to ask your question. All right, I'll read it out loud. So the question is, over and beyond activism, the youth of tomorrow are tomorrow's labor force. What practical, tangible, grassroots steps can be taken to link labor, demand, productivity, and growth with combating climate change, and where should this conversation be taking place? Sonica is an entrepreneur and someone who's working with local businesses in Nepal for your company and bringing the tech solution side of things. It'd be great to hear from you on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Saleh, for the question. So where this conversation should be taking place, I think it should be taking place in the grassroots, wherever the steps are to be taken. And I think, us being tomorrow's labor force, it's kind of, I see it as an opportunity. And I also see climate change as an opportunity for youth to really, turn it into opportunity to tackle this, right, with whatever the skills that you have and wherever you are. It could be at the grassroots level, or it could be maybe you're at the policymakers level. I don't know where you are at right now, but for me as an entrepreneur, I'm placed at the grassroots level, working with the local businesses, really tackling this climate change from the very bottom of the pyramid, but then making that change, right? Not stopping saying, oh, I cannot really solve this big challenge, but they are actually doing whatever they can from the grassroots level. I think the steps that you can take is whatever skills you have. I mean, I'm a technical person, so I use my technical skills to do whatever I can, which is why I established Alloy and working with this grassroots innovators or business persons, whatever you want to call them. You could be a writer, you could be a journalist, you could be a climate activist, but then, there's always something that you can do to see this huge problem as a challenge and opportunity to work towards the common better future. And I think this conversation definitely should take place here, should take place at your workplace, should take place at wherever you want that change to happen. So that's something I'd like to highlight. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'd like to turn our last question to Klaas. And Klaas, if you're available and would like to ask your question live, it'd be great to hear from you. And if there's any particular panelists you'd like to direct your question to.
Sure, happy to ask my question. And I think it was already answered a little bit in part earlier, but I'm really curious to hear what you think will be youth's great achievements this year in the climate conference in Glasgow, because youth were so successful at the last one. So it'd be cool to hear what you think we'll achieve this time.
Sahara, may we start with you?
Yeah, I think the first climate conference I went to set the bar so high that it's really difficult to, expect anything else. Like that was 2015, the COP climate conference where the Paris Agreement was signed. I think one of the good things that has happened is the US is back on the Paris Climate Agreement. And building on that, I feel like, given that we have a sizable chunk of countries which are aligned, now it really is about increasing the ambition, right? And I think the logic, the argument that often comes in the way of increasing ambition is economic reasons. For example, the stranded assets that will be created as a result of all the investments we've already made in oil and gas and coal, or the argument of a just transition, where you have to make jobs available for people who might be affected by us switching over to renewables. So I feel like these are the thorny issues where youth need to take a very strong stance. And the achievement would be to prove to the world leaders that in spite of these thorny issues that exist, you can still raise your ambition. The argument that renewables are not viable is not true, really establishing that. And while, going on the trajectory for mitigation, youth should also not be leaving out adaptation issues. I feel like, even if you transition to an economy that's a lot greener, that would still leave a lot of developing countries extremely vulnerable to climatic shock. So I feel like the discussions on loss and damage, for instance, is one where youth can really take leadership, and they can really bank on the fact that their very existence, for many Pacific islands, for instance, they're under threat of disappearing. So I feel like that could be a really strong argument for youth to make in terms of making loss and damage financing, especially, be back strongly on the agenda for negotiating. And that would be, I think, in my opinion, a great achievement for youth, because the benefits of this would be felt throughout our lives if we do it, aim to achieve that.
Great question, Klaus, and a great answer from Sahara. In our closing 10 minutes, I'd like to give each panelist 1 or 2 minutes for a brief kind of closing remark and reflection on our discussion today. It went by so fast for me, so I can only imagine for you, hearing from each other and learning so much. Really like to hear, if we were to reconvene this discussion in 5 years, what do you hope we'll be talking about? And what have you taken away from our conversation today? I'll start with Vladislav, please.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, first of all, I hope that such a discussion will not be needed in 5 years. If it's still needed in 5 years, it means that we altogether have not delivered for our planet the way we needed to. But while it is, of course, not an issue for just 5 years, but more than beyond, it is extremely important that our colleagues who attended today the webinar, depending on what sectors they represent, be they from corporate sector, from governments, from think tanks or elsewhere, what I would like them to take out of this is that we are just a glimpse of a much wider cohort of people who, by virtue of what they have done and are doing, they already bring an expertise that, even though may not necessarily fit into the conventional representation and notion of what expertise is, they are already professionals that need to be helped in their development and impact, but at the same time treated as equals, because this process of knowledge ideation in climate action together with the youth, and then application and transformation to policy, business ideas, and so on, it's a process that can succeed only when it's done on an equal footing, where all the participants, where youth participants are actually feeling themselves as equals. And I hope that through this webinar, you understood even more why it's needed to be that way. Thank you.
Excellent reflections. Thank you, Vladislav. Charlene?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking in 5 years, a lot of like the younger generation people, they might actually become the leading expert and decision makers, or on their way to becoming the decision makers in the field. So when these young people come together and sit at the table, they might actually be able to make some of the hard decisions or push the direct direction in the decision that favors their future generations. So that's, I think, the whole point of empowering young people as well, is that as they grow and as they become the decision makers, become the people who have stronger and stronger voices, they are taking everything they've learned along the way through these empowerment movements and taking it with them in their heart. And as they become the next generation of people who get the voice and get the say at the table, then they know what would be the right direction to take all of our future decisions. So that would be what I'll be hoping for. Yeah.
And Sonica, what are you hoping for?
Definitely. I mean, I would like to resonate on what Charlene and Vladislav mentioned. Of course, we hope that this discussion probably wouldn't be happening 5 years later, but if in case it is still happening, then I hope people, activists, climate advocates, everyone still persistently work towards solving this grand challenge and not be disappointed. Please persevere. So that's something that I want to mention, because that's the key, I guess, and that's one of the trait that youth really should have to really persevere towards one common goal. And I hope in 5 years, of course, I hope there's no Earth Summit. I hope there's no need of celebrating one day as Earth Day. But then if we are, then we should persevere and persistently work towards solving this grand challenge together and for a greener future.
And Sahara, what are you hoping for in 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think you guys covered most of it, but I feel like, in addition to what you said, we hopefully would have solved the issue of intergenerational equity by then, and everyone's on board. Youth are very central to the discussions, not on the silos. And so we can finally move on from this anthropocentric view to actually caring about interspecies equity, maybe caring more about other species, other animals, and saving the planet, because I think the Earth Day really encompasses not just humans, but every living creature that exists. And we can be more mindful of that going ahead. And I feel like this generation can really take the lead on that, making that transition happen.
Well, thank you so much to our fantastic panelists and to our lively audience for your really engaging and thoughtful questions. I'd like to wish everyone a very happy Earth Day, and particularly to note that just about 2 hours ago, American President Joe Biden has begun the Global Summit on Climate Change by announcing the United States will aim to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half based on 2005 levels by the end of the decade. So by 2030, the goal is that the US will have reduced emissions by 50 to 52%. And enshrine that more formally in its nationally determined contribution. So definitely something to be celebrating today, and certainly every day for these kinds of commitments, which one day might not seem so ambitious because we'll have technology from Sonica, and we'll have politics and economics from Vlad, and community-led solutions from Charlene, and a lot more community engagement and the integration of women in decision-making from Sahara, among many other things. So with that, I would like to thank our fantastic panelists. A major thank you to Anum Farhan for helping to organize and coordinate everything, and to Ben Horton for integrating Common Futures Conversations members into this discussion. I hope to see you all again soon, and maybe get to celebrate Earth Day in person together next year, should we be so lucky. Thank you all so much, and stay in touch.